Hi, welcome back to Elite Literary Book Group. I'm Rachel Beck, and we're in the middle of Shaston. And this is actually a very exciting part for Victorian literature. It's extremely exciting. And so, I mean, if you're reading it, you don't want to skip this part. It's a lot happens. For one thing, something big happens right from the start, and that is that Sue and Jude end up kissing, like for real. So to back up, okay, so she's about to leave. She has to go back home to Phillotson. They don't know how long it's going to be before they see each other again. And Jude wants to kiss her goodbye. And at first, of course, she says, no, unless it's going to be like, like you would your cousin. If it's that kind of kiss, then that's okay. But, nothing too lusty, So says, she asked, will you swear that it will not be of that spirit? She had asked. No, he would not. So Jude is actually kind of putting his foot down like, no, I'd rather not. And then they had turned away from each other in estrangement and gone their separate ways, till at a distance of 20 or 30 yards, both had looked round simultaneously. They had quickly run back and met, and embracing most unpremeditatedly, kissed close and long. That's about as racy as you're going to get for Victorian literature. When they parted for good, it was with flushed cheeks on her side and a beating heart on his. So it's, a great moment, of it just coming back together and at that moment just not really caring, Maybe some people saw them. But at that moment, it was just pure passion. It was just both of them, not just one or the other. At this time, that's what makes it so special. But there's also something, of course, kind of tragic. I mean, besides the fact that she just committed adultery, that's sad. But what's worse is what I think what Jude does next. And Hardy writes that the kiss was a turning point in Jude's career. Back again at the cottage and left to reflection, he saw one thing. That though that kiss of that aerial being had seemed the purest moment of his thoughtful life, as long as he nourished this unlicensed tenderness, it was glaringly inconsistent for him to pursue the idea of becoming the soldier and servant of a religion in which his sexual love was regarded at best frailty and at worst damnation. So what I think is sad is that, and you kind of saw this coming if you looked at the last video, Jude is completely conflicted about the sacrament of marriage. Okay, yes, I know this is how we're supposed to behave. This is what we're supposed to think. But why does it feel this way? Really, should it feel that way? I mean, if you kind of know with your gut how you feel, and people around you, let's say you want a divorce, but you're in a religious church or something, I'll just speak from my own experience, and people will say, but that's not God's will for you. And you're like, well, is his will just for me to be miserable? And they're like, yeah, that's the way it is. You can see how this causes some problems. He writes, strange that his first aspiration towards academical proficiency had been checked by a woman, and that his second aspiration towards apostleship had also been checked by a woman. Is it, he asked, that women are to blame? Or is it the artificial system of things under which the normal sex impulses are turned into devilish domestic gins and springes to noose and hold back those who want to progress. And it is a progressive idea to get a divorce, especially in these times. It's a radical idea, in fact. But he's asking, are women to blame? And this is an interesting question because women have always kind of been to blame for men's desire. And I'll give you an example of that. In the Orthodox Church, a lot of women cover their hair. I sometimes do, sometimes don't. Just, if I feel like it, I'll do it. But a lot of times I don't. And, you know, sometimes we'll wear sleeveless. And the argument is made that if you don't, you know, dress modestly, cover your hair, you're going to be tempting some man in church. But my question to that was always, so does that sound like I have a problem or that he has a problem? Because I'm not tempted at church. I'm okay. Why can't they be okay? So it shouldn't be a blaming thing that, you know, if this woman, you know, had just covered herself up, this other person wouldn't have been tempted. Why put that all on her? The other question, what he's really getting to is, again, back to that other video I did with, why did you make us this way when you knew we were going to sin? When you knew we wouldn't be able to control ourselves? And so what he does is he thinks, I'm not going to be a hypocrite. You know, whether I choose to believe or not, you know, I don't know if I will or not, but I know one thing, I'm not going to go after a career where, you know, I'm supposed to be like this example of what you're supposed to be, you know. And so he burns his books, all of his church books, Pusey, Newman, the fathers, all of this he decides to kind of make into a fire pit and have a book burning party by himself. There's two things that's wrong with here. I mean, first of all, I hate the thought of anybody burning a book or even banning a book, no matter what's in its contents, really. But this is the typical struggle for the Christian or dilemma that you see that's not just, you know, in his time, it's in our time too. Where the person feels so defeated that I can never, ever live up to these rules and expectations of the religion, so forget it. I won't try. I can't do it anymore. And I've seen this all my life. I mean, I saw this with my own parents. They would go through these religious stages. There were times when I couldn't listen to Madonna. And then later on, my dad thought, you know, the same song that he told me not to is like his favorite song. My dad preached at one time. And then I remember one time we were told that we couldn't go to church anymore because my dad said, I can't stop having affairs with the church women. And so it gives you a little glimpse into my world. But it was always, and I look at my dad's background and it was abusive, very legalistic, to the point of don't spare the rod and beat your kid, beat that religion right into him. And then guess what? You know, you have this person who feels like he's absolutely this miserable sinner, that there's something wrong with them. And you know what? If it's going to be this much trouble, then I'm not going to mess with it. In fact, I'm going to not even believe it anymore. I don't think it's true anymore. It can't be. So that's where Jude is. Now, you could always make the case that burning all this religious stuff, it could be the best thing Jude ever did for himself. You know, and you could back it up and write an essay. So by all means, you know, use what you want. But I just think it's a very sad thing because it just shows that he's completely given up. In the meantime, Sue's a little upset with herself for giving herself so freely at that moment and being impulsive, and she, is thinking, how can I punish him now? I won't write him a letter. That's what I'll do. I won't talk to him for a couple of days. So she goes, she likes the silent treatment a lot, but it doesn't sound like that's her real feeling, because the first thing she does when she gets back to Richard Phillotson, is she tells him not of the kiss, but of the holding hands, like she said she was going to do. And so this starts some problems in the relationship. She says, Richard, I let Mr. Foley hold my hand a long while. I don't know whether you think it wrong. Oh, did you? Why did you do that for? Or what did you do that for? I don't know. He wanted to, and I let him. I hope it pleased him. I should think it was hardly a novelty. And you think about the word novelty, this is nothing new. I already kind of know. Also, just as a teacher, I would always point this out, like when I'm trying to teach vocabulary, I don't like definitions so much as I do examples. Because this is something that you could memorize and you could come back with to somebody who says something, maybe even your parents, and you'd be like, well, I'm sure it's no novelty. And they'd be like, gee, what are you reading? And see how it works? I mean, so you learn a lot. And it's, it's work, but there's a lot of rewards to it too. And when phrases like that stick in your head, and then you can use them as your own. Even George Orwell said this of Dickens, that Dickens was a good person to steal from. So that's what people do who want to be writers, is really you're looking for words to steal. Not that you would plagiarize the whole thing, of course not, but the word novelty now can be yours. And so it's a great word. But you can see this kiss really has affected Sue because of her actions afterwards. Now it feels a little more imminent that she gets away from the situation. And so he notices that she's not in bed, and he calls out for her, and she's not answering, and he finds her like in this little closet under the stairway, and he's like, what are you doing in there? And she said, well, I didn't want to disturb you, so I came in here. But there's no bed, and there's no ventilation. You could suffocate. And she said, no, I think I'm okay. I think I'll be fine in the closet. And she made herself a little bed, like on the floor. And Phillotson's thinking, wow, she would rather be in here, that's not even a real room, than be in bed with me, than be close to me. And so in the next morning, it says, on rising the next morning, he immediately looked into the closet, but Sue had already gone downstairs. There was a little nest where she had lain, and spiders' webs hung overhead. What must a woman's aversion be when it is stronger than her fear of spiders? He said bitterly. So the light is kind of slowly coming on to Phillotson that she really doesn't want to be with me. This is awful. I need to go back and read this part because it's important. But so when the night before, when he went into the room and opened the door, she got really upset with him. Like, why would you do that? This is my privacy. She's hiding from him. And, he's just sort of confused and says, I've been kind to you. I've given you every liberty. It's monstrous for you to be treating me this way. And she says, yes, I know that. It's wrong and wicked of me. I suppose I'm very sorry, but I'm not altogether to blame. He says, well, then who is? And she says, I don't know. The universe, I suppose. Things in general, because they're horrid and they're cruel. And so he advises her to lock the door if she's going to be that way. And she says, oh, I've tried. So then that's when the next morning he sees where she slept in the webs and so forth, and thought, she'd rather be in here than in bed with me. And so when they have the next conversation, she asked Richard, would you mind my living away from you? And he's like, away from me? Why, that's what you were doing before I married you. Then what was the purpose of us getting married if that's what you want? And she says, you wouldn't like me any better for telling you. I don't object to know. Because I thought I could do nothing else. And she kind of explains, why did I rush to marry you? Well, if there was that scandal and, I was going to break it off. I would have much rather been unkind to you before and hurt you a little than marry you and just hurt you for life. And she blames herself, and she also calls herself, I did it because I was a coward. Because that's what women do. They see themselves a way out economically or an opportunity, and they seize it, but they don't know what it means to seize that opportunity. And especially if they don't love that person. And so she's trapped, and she's acting like she's trapped. And she's, afraid to be intimate with him and even to sleep in the same bed with him. So, certainly she's not going to want to have sex with him. And she's asking, she's questioning, what about, why are all these laws, made if to make you miserable when you're not committing a sin? He says, but you are committing a sin in not liking me. And she said, I do like you, but I didn't reflect it would be so much more than that for a man and woman to live on intimate terms when one feels, as I do, is adultery in any circumstances, however legal. So it feels wrong to her. And she's there, I've said it. Will you let me, Richard, will you let me leave? And he says, yeah, gosh, you distress me with your... She says, why can't we agree to free each other? We made a compact, and surely we can cancel it. Not legally, of course, but we can morally. Especially as no new interest in the shape of children have arisen to be looked after. Then we might be friends and meet without pain to each other. Or Richard, be my friend and have pity. We shall both be dead in a few years. And then what will it matter to anyone that you relieved me from constraint for a little while? I dare say you think me eccentric or supersensitive or something absurd. Well, why should I suffer for what I was born to be if it doesn't hurt other people? But it does. It hurts me. You vowed to love me. And this is something that Sue is always going back to. Okay, I get it. I'm different. I'm wicked. I should be punished. The gods should punish me. But at the same time, this is who I am. This is my nature. This is how I was born this way. I was been like this forever. And now, the marriage, any kind of institution for Sue is going to be oppressive. She can't seem to be herself and be someone else, technically at the same time. She's got to be free. So we ask, and do you mean by living away from me, living by yourself? Well, if you insisted, yes, but I meant living with Jude. as his wife as I choose. Phillotson withered. This is a great sentence because, it's two words. You have a subject and a verb, just like Jesus wept in the Bible. It's two words, a complete sentence. So you just have to have a subject and a verb. I think that's about as good a description as you can get. It's very meaningful. So she keeps building her case here and using John Stuart Mill, which I think is kind of hilarious. She continued, she or he who lets the world or his own portion of it choose his plan of life for him has no need of any other faculty than an ape-like imitation. J.S. Mill's words, those are. I've been reading it up. Why can't you act upon them? I wish to always. What do I care about J.S. Mill? Moaned he. I only want to lead a quiet life. This sounds exactly the way my arguments used to go with my ex-husband. And I don't want to hear your philosophy. And another thing to kind of point out is that, John Stuart Mill was very progressive. So, Phillotson isn't really quite that way, even though he is, he has his own academic endeavors that he's very interested in, and the Romans, for instance. But that's antiquity. He's not interested in progressive ideas, you see. So there's a struggle between the old and the new ideas. Now, this is where you kind of start to feel a little bit of sympathy for Phillotson. Although you should the whole time, right? But if you're anything like me, you're secretly rooting for Sue and Jude, even though you know that that's not the right thing, even though that's kind of messed up. But what happens, they write each other, they go to work, they have to go on with their duty at school. And he slips her a note and says, your request prevents my attending to work at all. I don't know what I'm doing. Was it seriously made? And she sends a child to go send him back a note and says, I am sincerely sorry to say that it was seriously made. So, unfortunately, Phillotson is going to be caught in this scandal as well, even though he hasn't really done anything wrong. He could lose his position. He will lose his position. Because remember what I said about reputation. Even if the way society, the way people are going to look at him is, why didn't you control your wife? And he even goes to a friend and says, he kind of confides in him and says, here's what's going on. And the friend is thinking, like, well, tell her no. What's wrong with you? You don't let her do that. Especially, looking at Sue is so much younger. You're going to let her control, the situation? And it is a terrible situation for Phillotson because he's going to be kind of a guilty party in all of this, even though he's innocent of it. Now, he does kind of make one concession that maybe I pushed her into marrying me because I wanted that so much. And I should have allowed her more time to figure out whether that was really what she wanted or not. So he goes to his buddy's house in the next chapter. He really needs to talk. And his old friend, Mr. Gillingham, is there and says, what's the matter? What happened to you? And it's nothing's wrong with Mrs. Phillotson, is there? He's, yeah, there is. We need to talk. And so he explains that not only does she want to leave, but she's in love with someone else. And Phillotson says, yes, with curious, tender solicitude, seemingly, though her feelings for him is a riddle to me, and to him too. I think possibly to herself. How does she really feel about Jude? She is one of the oddest creatures I ever met. However, I've been struck with these two facts: the extraordinary sympathy or similarity between the pair. He is her cousin, which perhaps accounts for some of it. They seem to be one person split in two. And what you find is that Phillotson actually feels for them. You know, he can feel kind of some compassion for them because he sees it. And I mean, he obviously sees that she doesn't want anything to do with him, and that, you know, it's even, you know, what's the word? Cringe comes to mind. You know, when my kids say that's cringe, this is cringe all the way. And he, you know, the guy's response, like I said, is it's like, so what? Who cares what she wants? You know, you're the man, you're the husband. This is going to ruin your life. Don't let her do it. And he goes more into detail about what they're like, Jude and Sue, and why he kind of feels some compassion towards their relationship. Their supreme desire is to be together, to share each other's emotions, fancies, and dreams. Platonic. Well, no, Shelley-Ann would be nearer to it. And remember, I mentioned Shelley before about, you know, Shelley's poem about infatuation comes up, is alluded to. Jude is reading it to Sue. And so he says, you know, it reminds me of Leon and Cynthia, which is part of a Shelley poem, and also Paul and Virginia a little. The more I reflect, the more entirely I am on their side. Which is interesting because, remember I was saying, it was like, even though you know it's wrong, it's like you're rooting for Sue and Jude. You don't want Arabella, you know, you don't really want Phillotson. And even Phillotson is saying, I find myself on their side. And the friend brings up the argument, but if people did as you want to do, there'd be a general domestic disintegration. The family would no longer be a social unit. So he's looking, you know, at the political side of things. We can't just let people not be married because they find out later they're not in love. What's that going to do to this institution? You know, and then, what do we have if we don't have some structure around here? We got to have some rules. And this doesn't really move Phillotson because he said, first of all, you know, you don't really know her. You haven't seen her. And, you know, he understands she's very sensitive. And that he's going to be just as miserable with her because she's only going to make him feel bad. And, you know, the guy keeps, you know, one argument is political, and the second argument he makes is, okay, what about the neighborhood? The Shastonians are going to crucify you for this. And, you know, later Phillotson, when he leaves, he reflects and he thinks, that's all you got? You have society, political, you know, he kind of, his friend sort of sounds like a Pharisee. And it's almost heroic that on Phillotson's part that he's willing to see what's happening to Sue, and that, you know, he doesn't want to trap anybody. And, you know, you don't want to make somebody stay with you if they don't. And so he tells her, I'm going to let you do as you like. You can leave. And he even tries to make her feel less guilty by saying, you know, I'm a bachelor by nature. as you know, in a heroic attempt to put her at ease, so that being without a wife is not really that irksome to me as it might be for other men. And then he says, I have too this grand hobby in my head of writing the Roman antiquities of Wessex, which is going to occupy all my spare hours. So thank God he's literary, because if you are, it'll solve all your problems. You just break up, I'll read Thomas Hardy. And you can always go there, and it'll occupy you, distract you in a good way. It's a good distraction rather than a bad one. And so she says, oh, okay, well, you want to send your manuscript to me, I'll help you. He says, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to, if we're going to do this, I don't want to go back and forth and see you, which is very wise on his part, right? And she says, you don't seem very sorry that I'm going, Richard. Oh no, perhaps not. I like you much for how you've behaved. It is a curious thing that directly I have begun to regard you not as my husband, but as my old teacher. I like you. I won't be so affected as to say I love you, because I don't, except as a friend. But you do seem that to me. And that's, if you think about her and Jude being kind of the same, Jude started off romanticizing his relationship with Phillotson too, as his mentor, as a teacher. And that's really what I think drew Sue to him. It really had nothing to do with, of course, not a physical attraction, but some kind of security in that, and in respect. And Phillotson at this point is acting very heroic, and his friend comes back over and he says, I let her go, and he says, most men wouldn't have done that. And he says, no, I've gone into all of that and I don't wish to argue it. I was and am the most old-fashioned man in the world on the question of marriage. In fact, I've never thought critically about its ethics at all. But certain facts stared me in the face, and I couldn't go against them. They went on packing, and so that ends this chapter, so I'll end there. But, even I think what Hardy's trying to do with Phillotson is show that even the person who's being torn to pieces by this and left, bereft with his Roman antiquity stuff, even he can see that making a woman stay with him is just inhumane. It's like putting like Sue is like the caged bird, putting her in a cage, closing the door. And what will happen to her? What will happen to her is she will become inevitably less attractive to him anyways, if she has to live like that. Okay, so that's enough for now. Thanks for listening. See you next time.